Hello, everyone. Welcome to our 17th episode of Girls Tech Talk. It's Tara and Shrima here again with one of our episodes where we are going to talk about what is cloud native and what are 12 factors app. So whenever we talk in terms of nowadays, we talk in terms of cloud provisioning or modernization or anything. This kind of question comes like whether your application is cloud native or not, or is your application is going to be cloud native. So this is one of the very widely used terminologies nowadays in IT. But I feel like it's also one of the most misunderstood term where not everybody is aware of or like fully aware of what does cloud native mean. So that's why we thought we will just give you a brief idea what does cloud native mean, and when you can say your application is cloud native and when you cannot say your application is cloud native. So I'll just share my screen, and maybe we'll give you first the Microsoft definition of cloud native. Cloud native. So what Microsoft says is cloud native architecture and technologies are basically, it's a way of designing your application where all your workloads are like fully managed by cloud. So whether it's Azure, whether it's AWS, Google Cloud, or any one of the private cloud. So if your application is like fully managed, meaning hosted and operated by cloud, then only you can say your application is cloud native. So it's like even if 10% of your application is on enterprise or like not hosted over the cloud, then it's not cloud native. For an example, if all of your services in your application are maybe in containers in Azure Kubernetes services, but the DB is still there as an enterprise SQL server, which is hosted in the legacy servers, then your application is not cloud native. Yes. So that's the difference. Usually people think like, okay, all my services are hosted as maybe you are using as your PaaS services, or you have hosted that as a in containers, and you think your services or your application is cloud native. That is not actually cloud native because you are not fully leveraging the cloud solution or cloud model. So that's why that is the kind of one of the broader perspective or picture when we can say which one is cloud native application and which one is not. The second thing is there are like four or five. Sometimes people say five, sometimes people say four. I'll go with four because that's what CNCF, Cloud Native Compute Foundation, has decided. So there are basically four basic pillars whenever you are trying to move to cloud native for your applications. These are something which you should be incorporating in your team and incorporating in your development model. So first thing first is the DevOps culture in your team. So it's like your DevOps engineer should be collaborating with your developers and IT operation teams. And then they should be working collaboratively so that developers can only focus can focus on the development, but all the process of deployment and operations, patching, support, everything will be automated. So it will provide a kind of ease and automation in this full cycle. So this is a kind of culture which need to be introduced in the team. Then the second thing is microservices. So whenever we are saying like, I want to move to cloud native, monolith is something which is not going to like fully support in terms of cloud native. Like obviously it can be done if your application is small, but if your application is huge and you have it in a monolith way, every time if you see if your code is monolith, it's like very tightly dependent. And the one of the basic advantage or what we are going to leverage from cloud native is auto scale, have high reliability, fast deployments, all these things. which is kind of like you can be achieved in monolith as well, but it's kind of hard to achieve. So that's why usually we try to move to microservices. Again, that is something which you have to decide and design in such a way that you are actually leveraging microservices, which we had talked in one of our previous episode. So microservices is one of the pillars of cloud native. Then comes the containers. Nowadays, cloud native foundation is trying to give up this idea that you should be using containers for hosting your services. This gives you like a very easy way of deploying your application. It's a lightweight alternative of virtual machines, and you can do it now and when. You can scale it based on whatever you want, like based on compute, based on events. So if you want to have those, if you want to leverage all those advantages of cloud native, then you can deploy it in containers. And the last thing is continuous delivery. So I guess most of you know like what exactly continuous delivery means. So it's the advantages, if we call on it, is like fast deployments, and then you can do frequent deployments, like you can do even 100 deployments a day, and then it should be like monitoring will be way easier, and like on a pre basis, like it will not be once something happened then you can check and all those stuff. And then it's like feed flow and then improvement. So these four pillars are there, which if you incorporate in your team, in your system, or in your way of working, then you will be able to achieve cloud native fully for your application. So this is what I something wanted to tell you about. Now I'll give it to Shrima. First, not only these four pillars, there are like around 12 factors which gives you like more detailed idea about cloud native. So Shrima, if you can give us the idea of all these 12 factors of apps.
Thanks, Tara, for giving us the insight of cloud native. And according to my experience, like most of the organizations are still following hybrid approach, which is not completely cloud native. And then the next factor is like next factor we should look for is like the 12 factors. It comes like when we are designing a new application for cloud native, or we are breaking our monolithic application to microservices. So who should first we are thinking like who should know this. So as a developer, you should think about while developing the application, you should look through on these lenses when you are developing it. And as a technical architect, when you are designing the solutions, when you are designing the framework, then you should know these factors and you should design it through this measurement. And I personally believe like when we see any application health or see any architecture health, these are the factors that defines that application or architecture. It helps us to measure the application, how mature it is, or what are the scope of improvement we should consider for future. First thing, we should talk about the code base. So if you have an code base in a single repository, it's very hard to work and very hard to understand like which code base is responsible for which services. So the first guide for microservice design is like separating the code base, building different repositories, and each of them should have their own version controls. It helps us, gives us like a bit of clarity. And then the next thing is like dependencies. Dependencies, like I could have like two different microservices which can be dependent on each other, and we should declare it and isolate it as possible. And then next is like configuration. it's it is not in good practice like if we store the configuration inside the code, then what happens, my application becomes strictly bounded to that configuration. So for example, database configuration or maybe some cache configuration, if we have it in separate, then for example in later point of time if we change them and move them, it does not impact my services at all. So we should keep that on mind. Basically, you can have it in your DevOps or in separate tools where we should have those configurations. And then one of the thing is like backing services. So when we say like backing services, application is just about your code base and the underlying services that's running my application. But it needs to connect with the database, it needs to connect with the caching. Those are the helping services which communicate with the application and make the application full-fledged. So we need to understand like how, what are the applications, what are the resources that is dependent on my application, and make them configurable as possible. And then we have the build, release, and run. Like obviously we should have, it's related to the DevOps pipeline. If we have a defined CI/CD pipeline, it's very easy to promote the application from development to testing and then production. And then processes is one of the important state, and it is basically when we are running any application, we should have like different processes for each of the services. We should make sure like none of the resources should not be shared, because then there the stage can be there could be problem using the state of both the services. And then we have the port binding. So it's recommended like each of the microservices should have its own ports to communicating. And concurrency is like when we are scaling my applications, or uh, multiple users are using the services at the same time, then how I am scaling the application, how I am scaling my underlying infrastructure for that microservice, that should be in the design. And that should and it should also guide us like what should be the limitations, and how should we tackle it further. And then disposability, it's like one of the concern, like when we are talking about high availability and scaling my application as needed, then it is also required to scale down them. Like I want to shut down my application, so what should be the stage of that application? How should I make sure like even if I want to scale down the application and data state are are a defined state that is already been defined while I am designing. It's not something new that we introduce at the time of scale down. And then we should think about development and production parity. So when we are keeping development, it's one of the previous points, like we talked about code versioning. It is very, we should keep in mind, like when we are, upgrading to one server to another, we should have a parity to each other. So for example, any changes should not be much costly. Then we should have a UAT always ready, which is similar to our production. And I mean our pre-production, I would say. And then development and UAT upgradation should be in written guidance, I would just say, or it should be automated through a DevOps pipeline, and a bit of management oversight should be there when we are doing any kind of release. It should not be much difference than in my production and development. Logs are very important. Like we should all the logs, like for applications or infrastructure specific logs, that should be we should consider actually in lens of observability we want to have in our logs, and have a kind of event driven system of that logs if needed, obviously if needed. And then there is admin processes. So admin process is something a lot of industries sometimes they do it after they build the application, because they feel like first we will build the application and then we will have our admin processes. There is no harm on doing that. It saves a cost, and also we see like what are the issues we are seeing, or what are the tasks we needed, what are the reportings or insights we want to build from it. But I would say like from an organization standpoint, we should have that thought process when we are doing that. So these are 12 factors, and there are also three factors which is later introduced by Kevin Hoffman. So he actually writes books on design and development, and mostly on programming and related to Microsoft technologies. So one of the 3 points he introduced, first one is like API first. So if you see like today's examples, like many of the SaaS applications or any applications we want to look for, or any tool set we want to see, first thing we see, like, does it have any API? So it helps us to integrate the application. It helps to have a standalone stabilized framework that has been accepted by the organizations, that I want to connect to you via API. It gives us a bit of mainstreaming the connectivity or mainstreaming the integration process. And I think the second point was like identity and authorization. If we have the proper identity authorization or RBAC method introduced in our application, and then I guess we have the traceability. Traceability is kind of interesting. Like, not every application we want to see that level of traceability. It can be on the users level, or it can be on the underlying infrastructure level. So that's the lens. Like, if you want to have that capability, I want to see that particular request from where it is going, or which services is impacted, which is taking longer time. That gives a proper health check of the underlying infrastructure. So these are in total 15 factors. We actually go through them while we design any application, or when we take any application, like how it's performing, or if I have to measure any application, like, these are the parameters, or these are the pillars I try to rate it. So that's on part. And Tara, if
I would like to add, when we start designing the solution, we definitely keep these in our mind. But there is one thing which I have observed throughout the years within the team, always in the developers, even when I was working as a developer, configuration, build, release, and run, and dev prod parity. These three things basically goes hand in hand, and until unless you are not implementing these properly, your application is never going to be proper cloud native. So by this, what I mean is, you should always try to have build once and deploy as many time as possible. So your build pipeline or build stage should be only one for your application, for your service. For an example, I'll just say service for now. And then it should be in such a way, the configuration should be in such a way, the deployment should be in such a way that it should progress, or it should get promoted from one environment to another environment, from dev till prod, with as least configuration changes and as least changes as possible. Like, even if there are configuration changes, at most it should be related to the configuration, maybe the database, storage account configuration, all these. That's it. Like, you should try to keep the changes as least as possible, and you should just like try to have build one and deploy multiple times. This, if you are implementing your application in this way, you will be able to achieve cloud native in like more easier and more faster manner. So that is one thing I just wanted to tell you. Like, if you are a developer, if you are a tech lead, or if you are even designing the solution, just try to give this insight or this suggestion to the team, so that it will be like even easier for operate for the deployments, and it doesn't make it like messy, your application messy. So that is something which I wanted to add over here. Maybe in next episode we will.
Then fast DevOps standard, I think we should have in DevOps strategy.
Yes. Yeah, even traceability is something which people should start introducing in their application, because that gives lots and lots of like flexibility for the support team, and it's easier for them to find out the full flow and understand, like, in a proactive manner, like where exactly the wrong can happen. So these all things are there which are coming into picture for your application to make more easier and dev friendly, support friendly, everything friendly. So just try to incorporate it in your way of working, and you will be having like a fully cloud native applications ahead in your future. So yeah, that's all we wanted to talk about in this episode. Maybe we'll be talking more on this because this is just a surface level discussion on cloud native. If we talk on it, there is like more than 2 hour discussion just based on like what we can do and what we should do for achieving fully cloud native application. So maybe we'll try to create more content on cloud native application and approaches, design and development in our next episode. Till then, have a nice weekend, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.